Hey there, internets. So, Mensch Joe decided he's going to give a bunch of money away as to try and get votes and make it look like he can actually accomplish something. And that is, of course, forgiving all these student loans. Now, granted, this is a little older. I started the research and got sidetracked because I got into what the real question we should be asking is. And I'll talk about that toward the end of this. But by and large of it is it's a pile of crap. I'm going to go over it with you. A lot of the stuff that I found in my research, because of course there's all sorts of memes. I'm still seeing memes going around about with a lot of bad ideas and bad information. What kind of kicked me in the butt getting this done today, other than having a day off and actually being done with a barbecue, because of course I didn't do my Saturday night rant. And that was because I was doing a barbecue for the people that helped me out with the flood. And I got my light up along with the fan. The cat is mesmerized by it, so hopefully he won't be jumping up here. But we got a bunch of student loans that need to be repaid. Now, full disclosure, I did not have any student loans. I did get a very small amount of scholarship money, and of course they had what they called the Hope Scholarship Credit. I don't even know if it still exists, back in the 90s, which basically gave me a tax credit that I ended up using after the fact. So I had to put up the front money, then get a tax credit at the end of the year for going to school. My wife still has student loans to pay off, and of course no one turns down free money, but we might pay it forward or something like that. In the end, I'm still against it. Shouldn't be done. It's a bad idea. And by and large, though there are people that maybe aren't using their degrees or got degrees they can't use, or there's maybe some very good degrees that they still owe a lot of money on, this is something that you made the loan, you need to pay it off, and there's a lot of bad information, because I saw a poll that said 55% of Americans think they should relieve this. That is not the case. I think a lot of for starters, this goes to high earners. To give you a perspective of your median income for household income in the United States is $79,000, and for an individual is $56,000. So when you're making that much, you're making in the upper half. You are not poor, despite what you might think. So this is entirely a giveaway to higher earners and people who are too irresponsible to get a useful degree. The second thing is that Pell Grant recipients who already got up to $20,000 of giveaway money because they were poor when they were starting college, parents were low income, that sort of thing, they get double the giveaway. It's not just $10,000, it's $20,000. So they're getting $40,000 by the time this is all said and done. So that's a huge chunk. And there's 43 million borrowers is the low end. I've seen it for 44 million. 40% of the student loans though student loan debt is postgraduate degrees. The average undergraduate degree, which is what most people are thinking of, it's not a person owing hundreds of thousands of dollars, and occasionally you see someone that did that. But when we get into some of the going forward stuff, and we'll talk about what should be looked at, understand that private tuition is tremendously higher, as is out-of-state tuition. The average student borrower of all borrowers, owes $32,800 for a bachelor's degree. If you're only talking bachelor's degrees, for people with graduate degrees, $37,667, and that's equal to buying a new Ford Mustang. You could buy a low-end Mustang and going quite a ways up in to the higher ends for that. You can definitely buy a whatever Harley Davidson you want. So for people wanting to be irresponsible, there you go. Those of it, and of course, like I said, those of us that I had no debt. I have some friends that I'm going to mention how they paid for their college. One of them had suggested I do a video, and I was already doing the research. They paid their debts. They get nothing. People that never went to college get nothing, but they will be on the hook, or because this is going to dramatically increase deficits, it's going to wipe out any of the Inflation Reduction Act benefit, and probably then some, either in terms of reducing the deficit or in terms of reducing inflation, which the Inflation Reduction Act doesn't, which I covered in a previous video. They get nothing. There are children, grandchildren are on the hook for this, for no real benefit. Federal guidelines say 10% of gross income should be going toward repayment. That's not god awful in the grand scheme of it. In my income level, that'd mean $4,000 or $5,000. In terms of somebody who's a doctor who should be making in the high 5 figures into the 6 figures, and in some cases are making much higher into the 6-figure incomes. People become corporate executives and high-powered attorneys. My attorney for the estate that I'm executor of, $250 an hour. And he spends 2 minutes on an email, he gets to bill me for a tenth of an hour. But federal guidelines say 10% of your income should be going toward repayment. If that 10% can equal the 8% you borrowed, then you should be making slow payments. The meme that prompted me looking into the interest rate side of this, and this is another misnomer. People say, oh, it's all this interest that people have. The interest rates owed are not usury interest rates, okay? I pay double-digit interest on my credit card. I think it's the lowest it's ever been was 12%, and that is a variable rate potentially. The meme said that one of the issues with it was not the $30,000 I spent in 1992. It's not the $30,000 I spent I borrowed for my bachelor's degree. It's the $22,000 it is now because of interest in the last 30 years. Well, if you've been paying interest 30 years, you ain't been paying on the principal at all. If you're paying on the principal, it means you're paying enough to cover the interest and reduce the principal, which will reduce your interest. Okay, it's just like with a mortgage. Earlier today, my wife was asking about the mortgage that we had retired because of some inheritance money, and I said it was when we paid the last payment before paying it off. I was paying about $50 more without paying any extra on principal than interest. Back when I first started my mortgage in 2004, I was paying a little less than $100 in principal and about $350 worth of interest. I got a small house. I grant. So these are decisions people make, and they are not typically variable rates. So most of these loans, you don't wake up one day and find out that your interest rate is quintupled. I got into it with somebody else in part because of this and looked up a few additional items, like whether these interest rates are variable rates or not. The vast majority are not, because federal student loans, the ones Biden can do this with, which is on shaky legal ground, most of them are these federally backed loans. A good portion of them are subsidized, about 20%, and the majority of the rates are in the 7%. Back 30 years ago, to go back to that meme, it was, mortgage interest on average for 1992, a new mortgage would have, and the cat wants to argue with me. He's not going to stay mesmerized by the fan. It was 8.39%. Student loan interest this century has never been above 7%. Or mortgages haven't been above 7%. Student loan interest was never above 7.9% this entire century. In 1992, it was 7 to 10% interest. So it was not god-awful far from what you would pay for a mortgage. And that is for an unsecured loan. If you completely default on that loan, your lender's SOL. So that's a very different situation. Right in this last decade, we haven't seen, for undergrads, I'm not going to count graduate students, it's a little higher, and there's a whole bunch of variables. including having to go to private lenders. But for undergrads, which is what most people typically are, 5% interest rate has never been higher than that in the entire previous decade. If everybody refinanced their student loan debt, you'd actually possibly see it drop to 4.2%. And all of this will be in links in the description below. If you want to check what I claim, you will find it there. So that's where we are with this. It's a free giveaway to the high earners. If you're wanting to say tax the rich, yeah, you just gave a bunch of money to the rich. Pretty much. So what could people do? This starts into your moving forward thing. Well, my one friend that first mentioned this, we'll call him S. He started out being an Asian studies major and ended up with 3 master's degrees. That he was having trouble finding jobs. He was working lower end jobs. I told him at the time he wasn't being creative enough, but he finally found jobs here and there. But he studied at Oxford, studied at University of Washington. I think he got a third bachelor's. The third bachelor's at Oxford. I can't remember where they all were. Did some work toward a doctorate. Then decided he needed to do something that was going to make money, so he got a master's degree in some sort of computer programming or something similar. And part of the condition of that was he had to work for a government agency of some sort, and that would get his student loans for that forgiven. So he had to earn that student loan forgiveness. So that's what he did. And he's recently moved on to a private employer. He earned it. He found a program that was designed for that. He didn't just get it forgiven for no reason. It was to meet some sort of specific policy interest. I have a friend, she's got a doctorate in nursing and a master's degree in nursing. Her bachelor's was in nursing. She has an additional bachelor's in psychobiology and a master's in public health. I'll tell you this much, she was the one I was asking about COVID-related stuff back when the vaccines came out and after. And I'm just going to say, talk to a medical professional you trust. That's all I'm going to say. And she is not anti-vax. She worked on the anthrax vaccine for the DoD. So she's not inherently anti-vax. I went to her. The degree that made her a nurse practitioner, she went through a program where she had to work a certain amount of hours or time in certain jobs. And we had the same martial arts instructor. In fact, all these people I'm going to mention tonight did at some point. But he said, oh, well, you're just letting people control you when you do that. Well, that's what the conditions of her being allowed to get those loans forgiven. It was a way to get somebody to pay. If you pay for this, I will do this. That's a fair trade. That's what she did. Those are 2 examples of that. Those programs do exist. Of course, many people have gone the GI Bill. Up to 4 years of tuition paid, money for books, money for housing. It doesn't pay every last thing, but it goes a long way. You could go serve in our military. Right now, they need that. When I worked for Lowe's, they had and I know that not every major corporation has this. Some do, some don't. Some have restrictions, like it has to be relevant to the business. And I guess toward the end, I could have used it to get a CDL, and I didn't. Whether that would be a good thing or not, another matter. Those kind of reimbursement programs are an option. Work for the right company. You can get money toward your bachelor's. I had a manager. This is one of the... he did Subakdo for about three or 4 months, maybe 6 months at a different school that I was helping out at. He, I think, finished his bachelor's, but it might have been an MBA. Don't quote me on that. He was able to get Lowe's to pay for it. You could, if you're trying to figure out how to pay for college, because we're talking about the how to pay for it side of it, cost-cutting measures. Go to school in state. University of Washington, I looked up its tuition. In-state tuition, $12,000 per year. That's actually low on the national average right now. Out-of-state tuition for the University of Washington, because that's who I'll pick on, probably in my videos. I'm going to pick on a school unless I need to get specific. Out-of-state tuition for the University of Washington, which is 40% of their students, is $39,900. So $39,900 per year for the tuition at the University of Washington. That's not including books, I don't believe, and I will just double check that. Where is the link? There it is. It just says tuition does not give a list for books. So I assume that includes books, but if it, or no, books and course supplies for at University of Washington is another $900, and that's just across. So that's an option for you. Stay in state. I remember back in the 90s, I was listening to Michael Medved, and we were talking about some forum, and some student from, I think it was University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, asked how he was from California. He says, "How are you going to make it easier for me to pay because I'm paying this much for tuition?" And Michael Medved said, "If you got the grades to get into school there, you could go to the University of California system and get a degree that would be just as good for getting a job for a lot less money." No one else is obligated to pay for you to have a best experience. Okay? You have that option. I know of one case for a guy I worked with, did not do Suwakdo. A guy I worked with, he couldn't get the University of Washington to take him for a marine biology degree. He did have a plan of what he was going to do with his degree, so that's one thing to be thinking about for the moving forward, to not pay so much. So he went to the local community college for 2 years, worked at Lowe's. When he wasn't going to school, he was working. He lived with his parents, and then he had all but 1 year going to Texas A&M paid for. So he might have had a year of student debt. If he's probably got all or a good chunk of it paid off. He's not going to get $10,000 if he doesn't have at least $10,000 of loans. And of course, there's scholarships and whatnot. I got a small amount of scholarship money when I was doing college. I mean, between the tiny amount of scholarship money I got and some relatives, I may have gotten 2 quarters paid for at Skagit, and I was doing some summer classes too to get more done quicker because I was getting the full degree in welding. So that's an option for people. Another option is Running Start. In Washington, I don't know if every state has this, but Washington, you can get your first 2 years, get your bachelor's knocked out, and sometimes even more. Get your associate's degree or transfer degree knocked out. First 2 years, paid for, done, and you're 2 years ahead. I knew a young lady. She had the same instructor I did. She wanted to be a physical therapist, more like an athletic side of it. She did Running Start. I think when she was 20, she was graduating from University of Washington. I think she's a mom now. I'm not sure if she's working it. Of course, she had probably had some student debt. If it's not paid off, why are the rest of us paying for her and her husband, who's a geologist? None of us should have to pay for that, and they are probably much higher earners. But that was one option she did. Got 2 years of it paid for. Some states have programs like that. I know Washington does. I can't speak to other states. So those are things that people could be doing rather than student loans, or as just offset that. So what could people do moving forward otherwise? What should our society be doing? Because this doesn't get to the root cause of the problem. And if I didn't mention it, because I don't perfectly script these, in terms of whether this will add to inflation, could add up to, economists cannot agree on whether it's going to add to inflation, what's going to eliminate, what the Inflation Reduction Act does, if anything, which, as I covered in a previous video, it won't. But if it does anything, it could add up to 20 basis points to inflation, depending on which economist you ask, which is not going to help when we already have high inflation. So that's one of those that to keep in mind, because logically, you think about it, any money that would go in toward the loans right now could be taken out of the economy because the government can pay its bills, not have extra debt. It's going to go somewhere else. If you pay off somebody's remaining $10,000 balance, even if they're only paying a couple $100, that's a couple of date nights, at least at my income level. It could be a car payment. It's going to add to other consuming. Because some people are just going to fritter it away or use it for other things. So the first thing, don't get useless degrees. If you need a degree in African American studies, Hispanic studies, Asian studies, queer studies, gender studies, women's studies, an English degree, and you're not going to be a teacher. Okay? You can don't get those degrees if you don't have a plan for a job. I had a guy I worked with, he's like, oh, I went and got an English degree because people said, oh, go to college. But that didn't give me anything. I ended up being a waiter, and I said, well, I said, oh, people need to think about getting a job. This was back years ago. I said, people need to think about what kind of job they're going to get. He said, oh, college isn't just about getting job skills. I'm like, then what's it for? He tried to say personal growth. Got news for you. The rest of us don't owe you money for your personal growth. You know what you could do? If you want to educate yourself on something that won't get you a job, pick up a damn book. I'm going to be an English major. I know this won't make a lot of religious conservatives happy, but I'm a Conan fan. Read a book. Lots of novels out there. Lots of good literature that, if you're into weird spiritual stuff, I got varied interests. You can read on the occult if you really want to do that. You can really get in some weird stuff if that's your interest and you want to have purple hair and whatnot. Political science. How about the road to serfdom? That's economics, actually. You can educate yourself in so many other ways. You want to do political science? I have this right above here. In here, Madison talks about that part of the structure of our government is to prevent a chance for faction, a check on faction, taking over our government. He thought of it in terms of interests. The indebted, the mercantile interests, the logging interests, the mining interests, the agriculture interests, banking interests. He didn't expect it to turn into parties. He said, but it would be a check on that. It would also be a check on, I meant to bookmark this and have this here, but he talked about it being a check on a rage for paper money, an abolition of debts, and a couple other things, or any other inappropriate or evil purpose. Abolition of debts, which is exactly what this is. Madison told us this. You want to study religion? If you're not going to be a minister, you can pick up a Bible, read it, or a Quran. Or you could pick up Torah or some other book that's of interest. And two of what's going to stay up here. You could be you pick up a book. You can educate yourself at any time. I was listening to Matt Walsh at dinner with my wife. He sounds far more educated, and I believe he's only a high school graduate. But he sounds like he picks up a book and can read it. Some of you liberal Democrats out there can't even pick up a dictionary, open it up, and look at what the word socialism means. I think socialism is any kind of government. It's not. Moving forward on this, unfortunately, a lawsuit toward this to stop it might not work. And I will link to this in below, but Ted Cruz has said that it may not work because though it's on shaky legal grounds, referencing emergency powers for COVID and emergency powers related to 9/11 for national disasters and national emergencies, and this isn't a national emergency, the doctrine of standing means that they may not be able to find somebody who can say Idra is directly harmed by this. And as such, they won't have anybody who can actually sue in court and say this is wrong. Maybe Congress could, but it's probably going to be a done deal. And of course, some people are going to want, oh, well, they did it last time, they need to do it again. Congress might be able to repeal those powers. Fat chance unless Republicans win the House, win the Senate this year, and then run the table doing it, and then run the table in 2024 to repeal those kind of powers. Let this be a warning about emergency powers. You're getting screwed because somebody did emergency powers and didn't have an automatic sunset. That should always be a warning. But anyway, and then of course you could refinance your debt, and I talked about that. You could, if everybody did it, they'd be down to an average interest rate of 4.2%. Of course, there is, of course, paying off your debts. But it doesn't get down to the real issue. And this is where we're all talking about how do we pay for college. And some have said that for every dollar they put on more student aid, they raise the tuition 60%. Tuition in books has far outstripped inflation. And I don't think there's one cause. My sidetrack on this was in that direction when I started researching. And some of it, they say administrative bloat, or is it this, or is it, reduced, the cost of government. At some point, that has to hit a rock bottom in the end. And so I went to the Department of Education site on a quick Google search. National Center for Education Statistics. They have almost every statistic in my video about why I was voting against public schools, and you should too. This is where I got a lot. They were a large portion of the source of my data, and they remain a large portion of the source, a good place to go and get data. To give you some perspectives, I picked they go back to the 1960s on this information, but I picked 1970 because that matches with what I did, a lot of other education measures. In 1970s, for all institutions of higher learning, tuition per year was right around $12,000 per year. And of course, that's average, national average. All of these are. In public only, in state public institutions, and this is all adjusted for inflation, it was $8,800. So adjusted, if they had matched inflation, the University of Washington would be charging $3,200 less. For private schools, it was $18,200 in 1970. To match that meme I saw today, in 1992, the average of all institutions was $15,600. Public institutions were $10,800, so only $1,200 under the University of Washington. University of Washington, on a national level, is actually looking better than most, to be totally honest. I might have to be digging into later why it's rising so fast. We may have to look a lot harder at some of the other states about what's pushing this up, because University of Washington is not as, well, it outstrips inflation. It's not as god-awful as some. I'll give them props for that, I guess, or whoever made those decisions. For private only, it was $10,800, or for public only. For private institutions in 1992, and this is profit and nonprofit, they didn't differentiate, it was $27,100 per year for tuition at a private institution. Now, across all institutions, $29,000 per year. Not hard to figure out how you can get to $120,000 before scholarships and grants and loans. For public universities, it's $21,300 private in public universities. This makes the University of Washington look like a damn good deal compared to a lot of states if you're in state. something to be happy for in Washington tonight. If in a private institution that is nonprofit, and this is the weird one, nonprofit, $46,300. In a for-profit institution, so University of Phoenix, for example, some of these ones that you see all the ads for, it's $20,700 at a for-profit institution. All of those vastly outstripping inflation, because that is all of those numbers I just gave you from 1970 on are in constant 2021 dollars. So that is adjusted for inflation. That gives you an idea of how much more. The cost of a private institution for nonprofit is $46,000, has doubled. It's 50% higher after adjusting for inflation than in 1970. If you go to a for-profit, they didn't split the others out. I didn't happen to look. I still have the link though. For all private and nonprofit. Okay, so private, private and private nonprofit is $46,000, $300. For nonprofit, it's actually $49,000. So there's, that gives you an bigger eye opener. So all private institutions, if across it's 46 and it's better than $49,000 for just the nonprofits. The nonprofits are almost twice as expensive as the profits. We should be asking where that money is going. Absolutely. It's no different than when the schools say our teachers aren't paid enough, and our teachers are spending their own money on supplies. So we raise taxes to pay the teachers more and pay for the supplies. And 2 years later, they're saying, we're still not paying our teachers enough, and they're spending their own money on supplies. Where'd that money go? We should be asking those questions and shining a light into them and asking why the tuition is going up that fast. You could maybe explain some of it on the public institutions on reduced contribution from government, but you can't do the whole thing on that alone, especially in light of what the whole of the country is, because those were all national numbers. University of Washington looks better than some states, and that's one of the rare things I can say about Washington. But in the end, we're asking the wrong question, and Biden is giving away money. So I'm going to leave it there. And until then, I will probably be back for a Saturday night rant. You all take care.